What's up, dudes? Max here, back from a quick trip, and right before I left, I had the opportunity to head over to Capcom and play a few games around Gamescom. That's going to be going down either pretty much today or the next few days. And they had several titles that were playable, and probably the number one that I was the most anxious to get my hands on was Onimusha. So for those of you that are unaware, Onimusha is sort of like, I don't think this is officially announced anyway, it sort of is my feelings on it, sort of like a spiritual reboot. Samanosuke isn't the main character, there's a new dude by the name of Musashi. The game, from what we saw at Summer Games Fest, looked to be very much in line with like the classic Onimusha. Now, the difference between the impressions I had at Summer Games Fest to what we're looking at now is that we have actual gameplay to show off of all this stuff, so you're going to be seeing a little bit of like a supercut of cool moments. And the second biggest thing is that I got to actually play it this time. I was pretty impressed in the initial demonstration that it just looked very cool, like a lot of stuff working together. It looked very cinematic, looked very flashy. So let's sort of just break down the few things that I remember from my playthrough and some of the stuff that really stood out to me. Number one, obviously the visuals. Ridiculously good, man. I think Onimusha might be one of Capcom's like tentpole, like best looking games that they got going on right now. And it just is more representative that the RE engine just keeps getting better and better and better at what it does. There's been some weird step backs here and there over the past couple of years with like Dragon's Dogma 2 and some big games like Monster Hunter Wilds needing some better optimization. But this game is not like that. Very much so what I will say is it's an emphatic positive about the visuals of the game, and the animation transitions are just top notch. These fights almost look choreographed, the way you engage enemies and stuff like that. However, there's a reason for that. The game is relatively like linear, and that might not be a big issue to some, but if you're expecting like very large scale open environments, like some other games that Capcom is under the RE engine, like we just said, then it's really not going to be that. You're pretty much focused in corridors, and the entire experience is about you moving from like point A to point B to point C relatively in a straightforward fashion. There's definitely going to be some backtracking here and there. There's some areas that we were unable to get access to. And granted, the thing that we did have playable for Onimusha was pretty much felt like the very beginning of the game, which is kind of like a gripe that I had. I wish we had access to something that was a bit further in, where we got to really explore a bit of what was like available with it. But right now it felt like everything was being specifically held back, and the level design was absolutely one of those where it's like, oh yeah, we're just sort of going through and it's about killing this dude, killing that dude, and moving forward as quickly as possible while just hacking and slashing and making your way to an eventual boss fight. So let's talk about the hacking and slashing, because I had the initial presumption, admittedly so, that this game was going to be kind of like a Souls-like a Capcom take on a Souls-like, and knowing Onimusha, and it's like, well, yeah, Neo has done that. There's been several other games like Sekiro that have sort of done that, and it is not. This game is 100% very much in the absolute respect of Onimusha as a franchise, especially Onimusha like 1, 2, and 3. I didn't play a whole bunch of Dawn of Dreams myself, but it really feels like they are not deviating too hard from what the classic Onimusha formula is. You have a basic attack button, you have a heavy attack button, you have a button that sort of like builds up in the background that is like a super in a way. Let's just say it's a super that does like a unique weapon, and then you have like a deflect slash block button, but also a dodge. And there's an interact, but the dodge button is kind of unique because you get this option between dodging attacks or deflecting slash parrying attacks. But the parry felt very much in line with kind of what you would expect from a traditional parry-like game, right? This game was going to have parries. It's going to be a big aspect of it. So if you're looking for a parry-heavy Capcom game, well, I just, going to break it to you. This one might be pretty big on that throughout the majority of its playthrough. Parries look really cool, result in some huge flashy moments that usually are the result of an execution of an enemy just getting cut in half. And the way you engage enemies is pretty fun. It feels like what the game wants me to do as you're moving through, and you go from like segment to segment to segment with some very, very light puzzle solving in this early access sort of preview of the game. It feels like the game wants me to dispose of these enemies as quickly as possible and as fashionably as possible, I would say. It's almost like I think there would be a style meter in the game in some way, but there is not. It sort of feels like with all these cool animation transitions, it just wants to make the coolest, most fanciest of actions sort of be happening all the time as Musashi is taking out all these enemies. As I said before, we didn't get access to a ton of like further mechanics in the game where you have to really balance and utilize these resources that you have against the enemies. If there's one thing that I can say about the demo that we played is that there were two options of difficulty. One being sort of a story/cinematic mode that will likely make a lot of the events of the story much easier, but I didn't play that one. I played the normal/professional difficulty. I think it's called like combat or something like that. And it was fun, but I did notice, especially because this is likely the very, very early portion of the game, which is a little bit of gripe. This is a little bit of a personal gripe myself. Man, we were just plowing through these enemies. You just sort of run in there and sort of hack, and chop like crazy. The game has a very lenient sort of like parry window, especially on animation canceling, so you can sort of like do a lot of attacks and stuff like that, and have these context-sensitive like finishers all over the place. Like, the main character will just zoop across and like whack guys, and it's about sort of chain killing these enemies in many ways, which is legitimately super awesome. I really enjoyed that part, but a lot of it didn't feel necessarily like challenging, even as much as like the old school Onimusha. But that game has a lot of like, you know, issues. It's effectively a Resident Evil game with combat, you know, even though you would say Devil May Cry is that, but this game has like actual tank controls, right? Old Onimusha is a legit tank control game. So you have these attacks and you get these unique weapons and you fight enemies, and enemies have counters or, you know, to these weapons and stuff like that. And it's just about figuring that out, getting through, and almost like solving the game like it's a Resident Evil where you're just crit pathing and going from point A to point B and really moving quickly. It's hard to say if this whole game is going to be that way. It looks a bit more, and this is just my personal opinion, it feels a bit more streamlined, where so much of it is just about getting you into this cinematic action as much as possible. And that's where that gripe I said happens, where it feels a little easy because of that. It feels like Musashi's effectively just doing a lot of this stuff, and I don't know if I'm like piloting it. It's kind of like at the press of a button, I'm doing some really fancy, you know, destructo attack against some guy where I'm flipping and dipping all over the place. But I did get the idea that there's a lot of like hidden mechanics in here, because even from some of the footage that you're seeing right now, there were some things that I was doing in my playthrough that was a bit different than some of the B-roll that Capcom gave me, and I'm kind of like, ooh, I wonder what that is. I'm kind of unsure what that is with our like 20 minutes with the game, you know? If there's one thing that I really hope when we get the final version of the game, is that the game is a little bit less in like automatic transmission. I kind of want to play the game in like manual mode, and it felt like with so many things just sort of like happening and flashy things, I'm like, I don't even know how I did that. And there's some big flashy thing takes place almost in every single situation and every single engagement to enemies. I'm kind of wondering like how I directly engage those mechanics and things, and how do I, you know, move forward to specifically do them when I want to do them. And it does feel like that stuff is there, but it absolutely is prioritizing cool cinematic action over everything. And because it's like kind of structured almost like in a Devil May Cry situation, it's not exactly where it's like limiting rooms and you fight all the enemies. You're just sort of progressing forward through these corridors and paths, and there's not much deviation to it, and you're fighting a bunch of dudes in the coolest way possible. That is sort of what the new Onimusha is setting up. In terms of tone and everything and story, there is a little bit. I wasn't super into it. It's sort of setting up the Gauntlet as this talking, sort of like aware character that is communicating with the main character at times. I didn't love it, but I definitely need to see the context that's building up to it and the things that happen after. The boss fight was legitimately super neat, but it came with that, you know, caveat that it's kind of easy. I'm sort of just like mashing against this guy and parrying when I think he's going to hit me, and I'm getting cool parries and all this stuff while it's happening. Either way, I still think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's easily one of the most anticipated Capcom games of next year that I'm very much looking forward to. And I think based on what they showed us in this preview event, the one thing that I'm looking forward to the most is how it elevates and escalates. I really want to see how all these abilities and things that you get can move forward. And it reminds me to a point where back in the day, we would play an action game from Capcom like Devil May Cry 5, and we would go to a preview event. But they would not give us just like the introductory sequence of the game. In fact, I think the introductory sequence we didn't play until the game came out. We got to play a couple of different like scenarios with like Dante and Nero and stuff like that, and they were a bit further in the game. They were like not the very beginning, but a little bit further, with characters had a little bit more access to things to sort of like tickle your brain that this is all possible. Which I really think would have been great for this. I kind of wanted to see some brain tickling in terms of like mechanical depth and stuff like that, and it just wasn't especially there in this very controlled, very early game preview. So, that being said, very much looking forward to it, and I think there's going to be a lot of really cool shit you'll be able to do with Musashi in this game when we eventually get a hold of the full game and do a full playthrough on this channel. Anyway, thank you dudes a ton for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the footage. I'll be back with more Gamescom impressions from Capcom stuff, including Resident Evil Requiem, as well as Pragmata. Stay tuned, dudes. My name is Max. Appreciate a thumbs up on the video, and I'll see you next time.